Welcome to the deep dive. We've got some interesting source material today. It's a video, actually, with different clips from Brazilian political shows, and we're going to break down the key bits from those sources for you.
Yeah, it's pretty intense stuff.
Definitely. The video really throws you into some heated debates happening in Brazil. You get these, totally contrasting views on some pretty controversial people and events. It's a real snapshot of the friction.
That's right. The source gives us two main things. First, there's this clip from CNN Brazil. It's called O Grande Debate, and it shows this clash about accusations against Deputy Eduardo Bolsonaro.
Okay.
And then the source shifts to a different segment. It's commentary from another channel, Direita Potiguar. And that part focuses more on criticisms of Lula supporters, especially around alleged links to organized crime, mentioning MC Poze do Rodo.
Got it. So our mission here, just to be clear, is to walk through these different viewpoints exactly as this source material presents them. We're pulling out the main arguments, the claims being made, just trying to understand what was said in these specific clips and how the source frames it all.
Exactly. We're not taking any sides here.
Absolutely not. Just looking at the content of the source itself.
It's about getting a clearer picture of the specific points and counterpoints that were raised in this particular video.
Okay, let's get into it. I'm interested to see how these claims and counterclaims play out in the source.
Right.
So that first part of the video source, the CNN Brazil O Grande debate, the focus is Deputy Eduardo Bolsonaro. What does the source actually show happening?
Okay, so the source presents this back and forth between two deputies. You got Lindbergh Farias, he's from the PT party, the Workers' Party.
Right.
And then there's Sóstenes Cavalcante from the PL party, which is Bolsonaro's party. Right. And the source shows this whole thing kicking off after Farias actually filed a complaint against Eduardo Bolsonaro.
Okay, and Farias makes some pretty serious claims in this clip, according to the source. What specifically does it show him alleging?
Yeah, pretty major stuff. The source shows him accusing Eduardo Bolsonaro of 3 distinct crimes. First one, national treason and attacking national sovereignty. And this is tied to things Bolsonaro supposedly did while he was abroad.
Great, treason.
Yeah.
And the source mentions, Farias specifically points out, Bolsonaro is overseas, apparently bad-mouthing Brazilian institutions, and even asking a foreign country to sanction Supreme Court ministers.
Exactly that, yeah. That's the point Farias makes in the source clip. Then the second accusation shown is coercion in a judicial process.
Coercion, meaning?
Alleging Bolsonaro is trying to, intimidate the Supreme Court ministers who are set to judge his father, Jair Bolsonaro.
Wow, okay. And the third one?
The third one Farias brings up, as shown in the source, is basically calling it a continuous coup attempt, aimed at, getting rid of the democratic rule of law in Brazil.
Heavy charges. And the source also points out that Farias directly compares what Bolsonaro's doing to the January 8th attacks on the Supreme Court building itself.
Yes, exactly. He uses that event, according to the source, to really underscore how serious he thinks these actions are.
Okay.
So after Farias lays all that out, the source then presents Sóstenes Cavalcante's response, and it's framed as a direct rebuttal.
Right, and Cavalcante doesn't hold back either, based on the source material. How does he counter Farias?
Well, the source shows him starting off by saying the PT party has amnesia. That's the word he uses.
Nia.
Yeah. He brings up 2017-2018. He claims PT parliamentarians traveled abroad then, apparently to over 30 countries, specifically to denounce the Brazilian judiciary because Lula was imprisoned at the time.
So he's pointing to what he frames as similar past actions by the other side to kind of counter the current accusations. Is that the idea in the source?
That seems to be the strategy presented, yes. He contrasts that period saying, back then, according to the source, opponents didn't sue the PT members doing this because the understanding was politics is resolved in politics.
Okay, that's a key phrase he uses in the source. And then he suggests the left only resorts to judicializing politics, using the courts for political fights when they're desperate.
Exactly. That's the argument presented in the source. He frames it as something the left does when they feel like they're losing politically. He basically implies Farias is doing that right now.
So it's positioned as a strategic tactic in the source.
Right. And the source shows Cavalcante defending Eduardo Bolsonaro's actions. He points out Bolsonaro is licensed, unpaid from his deputy role while doing this, and he frames it as a son legitimately defending his father, Jair Bolsonaro, who Cavalcante claims in the source is being persecuted.
And then comes a really provocative statement he makes, as shown in the source, about potential international sanctions.
Yeah, very provocative. He says, according to the source, that if any international sanctions happen, it wouldn't really be because of Eduardo. It would be aimed at the dictators of the Toga.
Dictators of the Toga. That's a pretty direct, strong shot at the judiciary, as presented in the source.
Oh, absolutely. A very clear reference. And he claims Brazil is living under this worst kind of dictatorship.
Wow.
And he doesn't stop there. The source shows him going on to allege that this so-called dictatorship of the Toga harmed, quote, powerful interests of the other government, implying that's the real reason sanctions might happen, basically turning the tables, blaming the judiciary and the current government's allies.
Okay, so this first segment in the source really lays out a core conflict, doesn't it? You have these direct, very severe accusations, treason, coup attempts.
Yeah.
And they're met immediately with counterclaims of hypocrisy, like you did it too, and these really strong accusations against the judiciary itself, calling it a dictatorship.
It really shows the intensity, doesn't it? And just how the arguments are framed in this snapshot from the source.
What strikes me, looking at how the source presents it, is how quickly both sides seem to jump to framing the other's actions in the most extreme way possible. It's either, a threat to democracy itself, or it's a politically motivated abuse of the justice system.
Exactly. There doesn't seem to be much middle ground presented in that exchange shown in the source.
All right, let's switch gears then. The second part of the source material. This moves away from the debate format to a commentary segment. It's from Direita, Potiguar. And the source says it's introduced by the original video's host, Ricardo Dias.
That's right. And Ricardo Dias, in the source, kind of sets the stage. He makes this claim that the right deals in facts while the left uses narratives, and says the internet is good at exposing hypocrisy. So that's the framing provided for what follows.
Yeah, though it's interesting, the source also mentions Ricardo Dias himself isn't totally sure if the commentary that follows is like part of a satirical character the commentator sometimes uses, or if it's completely serious.
Right, there's that caveat mentioned in the source. But regardless of the persona aspect, the actual content of the commentary as the source presents it is very pointed.
And what's the main focus there?
It's really sharp criticism aimed at Lula's supporters, specifically focusing on how they defend the funk artist MC Poze Rodo and connecting that defense to alleged links with organized crime.
Okay, so MC Poze Rodo is central here. And the commentator, Direita Potiguar, she really goes after Lula's strategy first, right? What does the source show her saying?
Yeah, she starts with some broader political commentary in the source clip, suggesting Lula might need to censor social media or even hurt the economy to get reelected. Pretty strong claims there.
But then she zeroes in on MC Poze.
Yes, that becomes the main thrust of her argument in the source, particularly the way figures on the left defend him.
And she makes some very specific allegations in the source clip about MC Poze himself.
She does. The source shows her claiming he's linked to the Comando Vermelho. That's, a major criminal group in Brazil. And she even claims in the source that he admitted this connection himself during, a custody hearing.
And she argues his arrest wasn't about his music.
Exactly. The source shows her making that point very clearly. She says his arrest was because of these alleged criminal ties, not because of his song lyrics. And this is presented as directly countering arguments based on, freedom of artistic expression, which she implies his defenders are using.
And then she calls out specific people.
Yes. The source shows her accusing leftist figures of hypocrisy and elitism for defending MC Poze by saying he represents favela culture. She specifically names Teleria Patron, who's a federal deputy, in the source clip.
And what's her argument against that favela culture defense, as presented in the source?
Well, the source shows her arguing that defense itself is prejudiced. She says it implies that the defenders think favela culture is inherently criminal and misogynistic. And she pushes back strongly, stating in the source that poor Brazilians are often more honest than the political elite.
Okay. That's a complex argument she's making there in the source. And then she makes a pretty striking claim about his concerts, right?
Yeah, this is a key part of her argument in the source. She alleges that the real problem with MC Poze shows isn't just, offensive lyrics or whatever. She claims they actually serve as a front for money laundering for organized crime.
Wow, so that shifts the whole thing from a cultural debate to alleged serious criminal activity, according to her claim in the source.
Precisely. It reframes the entire issue. And then finally, the source shows her delivering this really strong condemnation. She targets the left for, as she puts it, allegedly defending people who celebrate the recruitment of children into organized crime. She calls that unforgivable in the source clip, saying it's worse than a criminal just paying their debt to society.
Okay, so this second segment from the source, it really digs into another kind of political attack, doesn't it? Moving from general political strategy critiques to these very specific, intense accusations involving major crime groups, specific politicians, and framing it all through this lens of hypocrisy and cultural representation versus alleged criminality.
Yeah, definitely intense claims presented in that part of the source material. It shows a different kind of battleground in the discourse.
So let's try to wrap this deep dive up. It's clear just from these specific clips in the source material, we've seen a real range of political conflict in Brazil. You go from these high-level accusations in parliament treason, judicial overreach,
Very fundamental stuff.
to these other kinds of arguments in the commentary segment, focused on cultural figures, alleged crime links, hypocrisy. It's quite a spectrum presented.
It is. And I think what the source material does effectively is showcase these contrasting narratives and just the sheer intensity of the criticism flying back and forth in Brazilian politics right now. The examples we looked at, the accusations against Eduardo Bolsonaro, the commentary on MC Poze and the left, they really highlight the specific tactics and the kind of language being used, at least in these sources.
And for you, listening to this, hopefully seeing how we've unpacked the claims as presented in the source helps in navigating this kind of information. It's really about understanding the specific points being made, how they're framed by different sides. Just hearing what they say are the facts or the narratives in these specific moments captured by the source.
And maybe a final thought to leave you with, something that comes directly from the kinds of arguments we saw in this source material. What does it really mean for political debate when opponents are constantly accusing each other of these fundamental flaws? Things like hypocrisy, like weaponizing the justice system, or even, having connections to criminal groups. How does that kind of framing, the kind we saw examples of in these sources, end up shaping the whole political landscape and maybe how the public sees things?
Something to think about. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into this particular set of source materials.